I cordially welcome you all to TechBharat 2021, Empowering EduTech and Health Tech. TechBharat is an initiative of Laghu Udyog Bharati Karnataka and IMS Foundation. TechBharat is envisioned as a platform to support startups and SMEs and be a guiding light to them in navigating their entrepreneurial journey. We are lucky to have found support from the Government of India at every stage, and we thank the ministers, officials, and representatives of Department of Education, Department of Health and Family Welfare, Department of Science and Technology, AICTE, and CSIR in encouraging us and supporting our vision. We welcome you to this session on support to startups in healthcare technology. Making healthcare innovative in its affordability and accessibility is the biggest challenge world continues to face. As healthcare technology startups are on the forefront in creating products and services that benefit both providers and patients, they need both funding and technology partners at present. Other than the schemes to promote entrepreneurship through Make in India, Digital India, and Startup India, there is a bigger need of funding in India by worldwide investing communities. To discuss this further, we have eminent panelists with us today. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Mohan Sundaram, CEO, Artilab Foundation. He has worked and excelled across a wide range of industries in top management and business leadership roles, with strategy and technology being the anchors for over 24 years. He has been engaged with incubation since 2009 in NSRCL, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, and has mentored over 800 entrepreneurs. A heartfelt thanks to you for accepting to moderate this session, sir, and we welcome you to TechBharat.
Thank you, Vishu. Warm welcome to the other panelists. To start off, I would like each one of the panelists to introduce themselves, maybe say a few sentences about themselves so that the audience becomes familiar with who you are. Would you like to go first, Dr. Taslim?
Hi, hello everyone, and delighted to be a part of this panel at Tech Bharat. I'm Taslim Arif Syed. I work as a CEO and director at CCAM, that is Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms, which is supported by Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. We are based out of Bangalore, and CCAM aims to be achieving deep science innovations, largely in the area of life sciences, which covers human health, agri health, and environmental health. Personally, I am trained as a neuroscientist through my PhD at Max Planck Institute of Brain Research, postdoctoral work at University of California, San Francisco, and further engagement for management training at UC Berkeley, UC Haas, as well as at Wharton. And I'm delighted for last few years to be able to involved in taking excellent science, which can actually be the fundamental source or the core of building innovations which has societal impact. And I'm happy to talk about it in detail today. Thank you.
Ravi?
Yeah, hi. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Ravi. I'm the founder of Push Engage, a company that does web push notification, largely in the marketing automation space. Incidentally, I just sold this startup a few months back, and I'm on the way of my transition. Looking forward to the next phase, which probably is in the social impact space. Prior to this, I have done angel investing through entity called Srijan Capital, where I have personal investments in 7 companies. And then I had done another startup. And prior to that, I was a venture capitalist in the US, where I had invested in startups. And I have been also a technology person, starting my career at Hewlett Packard, and then moving on to doing startups. So I'm glad to be here and happy to talk about maybe the investing side or my view of healthcare in India.
Thank you, Ravi. Now, for this session, healthcare is a fairly vast space. So, for the ease of addressing issues which are different, breaking it up into 2 different segments. The first segment will talk about software solutions covering EMR, EHR, aggregation, data analytics and reference systems, genome sequencing, drug discovery, essentially non-hardware part of healthcare. And then we'll have another segment that specifically talks about medtech and assistive tech, which is hardware-based solutions in the space of healthcare. right? So I'll go with you, Tasneem, first, and ask you a few questions, and then I'll move on to Ravi. So, what is the profile of startups that you have seen, and how do they bloom? What kind of time is required? What resources, and what kind of motivation do these people come with, and how does it last?
Thanks. Thank you so much, Mohan. It's a very broad question, but let me try to answer. Uh, if I may start with, I think through CCAM, where we have now our own 200 startups funded by us, but largely also in touch with 1,000 or more than 1,500 startups across India. What we are seeing is that we have a huge spectrum, as you said. You can have a technology startup which is building a product for healthcare delivery or a healthcare delivery technology. So it's a two different thing altogether. And that's where something that we are getting a full spectrum in terms of healthcare. So there are startups, as you rightly said, which are building drug discovery understanding for infectious disease, for cancer, for other things. At the same time, startups which are actually building capability on genomics to build something called personalized medicine so that the treatment can be more accurate. At the same time, you have startups which are building what you would say the support for the healthcare delivery side. That is now more talk about from the support of the EMRs, EHRs, remote monitoring of the patients who are right there inside the ICUs and how that can be done. So it's about management of the healthcare delivery for healthcare professionals. And of course, one would talk about, just take a one leap forward, and you have more or less coming to what you say that the, remote diagnostics, which would be another ball game altogether, which is, according to me, if we nurture it well, it will change the scenario of healthcare in India, and we have to do it. To be honest, we are really, I think 30% of the Indian population, which is underserved, deserves it badly. So it's very broad spectrum, and we are lucky that we have people are attending broad spectrum. We are not going after one particular aspect and just attempt because there is opportunity. What is that people why people are actually what are they passionate about? I think again the kind of innovators or entrepreneurs who are coming on, I would say, are coming from different quarters. I would say that there is a group of exciting, fine talent coming from NID plus a mechanical engineer who come together and say we want to do something, but possibly are not looking for a traditional, conventional engineering aspect, going forward. At the same time, some of the people who have had what you say experience in the pharma company and served pharma company want to do something which is more risky and build something which is a global challenge. So there are but I think if I may just take the common aspect of that is to do something that is unusual, to do something that is not yet done, and it is not a me too product. I think very few people I have seen actually are attempting me too, and that's a silver lining that we have. While we are attempting so many good things, there are more attempts for not me too but something that solves problems around us. So, as I say, and I'll stop here from saying it, the good story is that while we are building something, we are actually more or less solving it for India with the side mirror that India requires indigenous solutions in healthcare because usually healthcare solutions have been built for global, and Indian conditions and the environment is different, so they are not right fit. So we'll require different forms of such solutions. That requires a good ear on the ground to be able to build it. And that's where I think but it's very exciting time, I would say. I think something we need to take it forward.
A lot of pointers that you have given, and we'll follow it up with questions in the next section because some of these are a lot more relevant for the next section also. So you have been running this incubator now for a while, right? So as an incubator, what do you see are your challenges in working with startups in this space?
So I think one important thing, Mohan, we did is that when we started CCAM, which was positioned as a catalyst for bioscience research and innovation. The idea was that can we be a player, if I may say, like a soccer field player, who is in the midfield, who actually engages with both early stage researchers and the innovators, and ensures the catalyst activity that happens. Incubation or the entrepreneurship thing happened 3 years after we started. So before that, we had a very strong ground in technology platforms for bioscience research. When we began, and I'm giving you a very quick context, I'll come out of it very soon. When we began, it was clearly that it was not to provide space, but it was more to provide the intellectual environment and capability. And that is something we have possibly stayed on. Idea is not to give them 100 square feet or 200 square feet space, but the idea is to talk to them about their science, about their journey on a daily basis, engage them with both experts from academic background, engage them with industry, give them a larger perspective, ensures that the high-end capabilities they require is there, and they don't need to be on campus for that. They can be more than required, but in around our 200 startups, 95% of startups are outside CCAM. We engage with them. So one of the things that as a challenge we had to do is that not to possibly get into the conventional mode of incubator, but rather build an ecosystem, a hub where people can come, engage intellectually and build on it. And then as we go forward, we realize that for that to happen, we had to build add-on capabilities which are more than scientific, is to business. So we had a very good mentorship capabilities, business capabilities, that we had to come and collaborate with outside experts to do that. IP, tech transfer, regulatory, as you know, and so on. So I think those capabilities were the key for us to build on top of the scientific intellect that was on the ground, and then go and expand on it. That was one of the largest challenges. Last, and I would stop here. Considering this is all a long term, healthcare is going to be a long term. Even if the product comes, the sales are going to be early on this much, and then you go further on that. The understanding of people to say that you should have 3 years of incubation and you should come out of it and all is something one could actually see differently. And I said that, why can't we continue engage so that we can nurture the full journey, rather than saying now you go to Pinya and then find your own thing. Like going to Pinya is now you're disconnected with the research ecosystem. And for a good app, you can't do that. So there are the small issues that we actually tackled in a way, and those, so more or less taking a model to a different way and then build on it. I'll stop here for now.
Good. So the follow-on question to this is, you are firmly grounded in science and research, and so it's likely that a lot of startups that come to you are people who are interested in the research and the science and then want to do something new. So typically what we would call as innovators. But innovators need not be good entrepreneurs. And when you do a startup, you need a good entrepreneur, right? How do you look at that problem, and how do you address that problem in startups where the guy who comes to you is an innovator, end of the day you have to build a business?
I think spot on. I think, Mohan, there cannot be a better question than this. And it is a challenge. I think you are spot on in that. So it's kind of you have to, and as we decided that we want to pick a path of deep science, as you rightly said, we'll possibly have more people who have more scientific bent, technology bent of mind than the business bent of mind. I think spot on. I think that's where we attempt to, at the early on, we actually work with them now because of our understanding to say, what's your long-term business proposition? And I would not shy away from saying that possibly 20% of people just do not make it just because they do not have a good business understanding at all, at all. And while we attempt to add to that, we attempt to say that you need now a person who is just talks business. You have taken care of POC, you have taken care of everything. They're unable to do that, and that's a single factor, I would say, that actually failed them. So that is definitely a big thing. But we look at the 80% where uh, by enabling scientist and technology guy to take on this, we are actually now have a critical mass of phenomenal innovation attempts which are being done, which are possibly new path breaking in potential if they go forward. And some of the results we have, like if I may say very, very quickly, I'll take a few names. In drug discovery, people like Aiton Porras, Bugworks in and then Zumator in medtech. I'll possibly Koyo, Nessa, and so on. In agriculture, C6 and a few more. In environment, String, and so on. These have now proven themselves as a business potentially successful based on a solid science. So we are put, as you rightly said, we are going starting from a good science and attempting to build a good business case for them as we go. But it is a challenge, and we continue to attempt to address that.
Okay. The So we see incubators, and we see a lot of this being supported by the government and a lot of money. So how do you think the incubation space itself, the way it is looked at by various stakeholders like the government and the incubators themselves, must morph to do a better job than what we're doing right now?
Correct. So I think the first attempt has, the first phase has been good, I would say. I think in terms of healthcare, 2011, 12, 13, as the attempt started, I think what it has done slowly now, they have built good environment for people to go to and get support from. So that rather than going to central agencies and government agencies, there are players who are trying to help them. So that's where incubators' role has been. So what we have, according to me, what we have done well in this field is we have done good primary school system building. Now, since the classes and those guys, some of them have done well, what they require is a good school now for the mid school, which is a scale up process. Now, this is where important infrastructure establishment is very good. Either you call it incubation or whatever you call it, but do we have infrastructure for healthcare, which is much more expensive than even early stage work? They need large fermenters, they need large GMP suites, they need large other thing, which is not a cup of any startup for now. And for that you need, and that's why worldwide they have built infrastructure for people to come and use it in whichever model they are. This is where the next work has to be, where we need to have good mid school, so those guys can go to the next level. So that is very, very important thing in terms of building those infrastructures capabilities, technical capabilities, which is high standards, and then go from there. And the last but not the least, very importantly, I think it's right time for all of us, including government, to look at now that pick a few. Now you have actually spread it wide and nice. So you have to pick a few and make them the world class. Give them the support to be center of excellence. So this is the time now you pick your best schools and highlight them. While you have done your many schools because you wanted to have every ward and every constituency represented, few of them have to now be supported to the highest level. So center of excellences, be it sector wise, be it otherwise, actually have to be built and at the scale. So those infrastructure, the dialogues that you want to have at the world class level need to be done. So I would say these are the 2 points I would say in terms of working with government and taking it forward.
Good. Thanks a lot for these perspectives, Taslim. I invite Dr. Garg. Can you introduce yourself, say a few words, please, and then I will give you a bit of the context of what we are discussing.
Yeah, thank you, Mohan. I am a senior director at the Ministry of Electronics and IT, looking after the startups and the innovation. In addition, I look after the IT/ITS industry, promotion and international cooperation, both bilateral and multilateral. So this is a brief of what I do right now. And talking about startups in the healthcare sector, let us understand that we at present are all focused around healthcare. This is the biggest challenge that mankind is facing, and this is the biggest challenge that mankind has ever faced. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So what we have done is we have split this panel discussion into two halves. The first half is looking at the digital mechanisms, non-hardware based sector startups, which will deal with EMR, EHR, healthcare delivery, drug discovery, genome sequencing, and all that stuff. Right? We are in that part, and the second part would deal specifically with medtech and assistive technologies, because the challenges we see as distinctly different. Essentially, what we'd like to know is what is government's own worldview of how these digital healthcare areas should be promoted or built, what kind of grants or investments are being made by the government in this space to promote both the ecosystem and the startups?
So thank you, Mohan. So if I can answer the first part of your question, is that the government thinking is there's a whole lot of focus on digital technologies assisting healthcare in the government. The challenge with digital technologies, whether it's AIs or IoTs or uh, any machine learning processes, which will actually augment the capacity that is required for healthcare to reach the last citizen that is needs and health support from the system. The traditional methods in the present times are challenged and they need to be augmented with digital solution. The challenge with digital solutions is twofold. The one is innovation that has to be built into the system. Second is access to data, because most of the healthcare systems are data intensive, and there needs to be an access to data for innovation to happen in this field. Now, as far as data is concerned, it the focus of the government is that the data should not be a proprietary property of few players, but an open innovation network should be evolved to make this happen. So if what government did post uh, to government did to assist the healthcare system through digital technologies was come up with a solution called the Aragya Setu. Understand the Aragya Setu, I admit, has not been a product developed by the government, but has been adopted by the government, provided by the one of the very important startups in this sector. So, what Aragya Setu did was to create a network where a lot of digital technologies can flow into the system to augment the challenges that are posed due to COVID. Post, government came up with the health stack, and the Honorable Prime Minister announced it in his Independence Day speech. What does the health stack does do, or a health platform does? Understand the difference between Indian innovation ecosystem and the global innovation system is the difference between proprietary digital platforms and public digital platforms. The health stack is a public digital platform which brings in the whole ecosystem onto a open platform where data gets aggregated and will be provided to all for innovation to happen. So this is the biggest support I feel, besides all startup support funds and schemes and center of excellences which Sai talked about. Uh, these are all enablers for innovation to happen. But the biggest enabler is the public digital platform on health that government has come up with and has conceptualized and is operational now. Second important thing which Mohan I think is important for this to happen is how do you actually bring more and more innovation into the system. The first and foremost is access to funds, access to market, and access to support from the large industries or from the experts. The AMTZ at WISEC, the Center of Excellence on Healthcare in Lucknow, with support from the Sanjay Gandhi Institute, and the whole lot of our deep tech innovation support programs, which I think my earliest, in one of the earliest sessions, the CEO from my MSH talked about, Mr. Jeet Vijay, is an mechanism by which we try to provide all necessary support for the healthcare system to be supported through a startup ecosystem. We came up with a technology incubation and development of entrepreneurship scheme in which CCAMP is also a part of that activity. That is where we bring in the premier educational institutes providing technology as a pre-enabler for startups to do a fast track innovation. Our focus is building frugal, low-cost solutions that are reachable to the poorest of the people around the globe. Understand, the Western model of healthcare innovation was only able to cater to the first 1.5 billion of the population. The rest 6 billion are still untouched with the innovation ecosystem and the goodies that have been provided by them. Indian innovation system through the public digital platform and through a startup ecosystem that gives fast low cost solutions is an attempt to reach out to the whole 7.5 billion global population. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a very nice exposition that you have given, and a good parallel to what we've achieved with the Aadhaar system and the India Stack and Health Stack is a very nice extension of that. In fact, I'd written about this in the month of March in a blog as to how Arogya Setu can give rise to a platform and a front end. Now, whichever way we look at this, the government is one of the biggest consumers of any healthcare solution in the country, because our healthcare is largely driven by the government and rendered by the government. Now, when there are so many innovations coming up, the government is looked at as one of the most difficult markets to deal with. Okay, there
Yes.
is really, because while on one hand you want to say there should be innovation, you would say there should be 5 years of existence in the market, there must be 3 years of balance sheet and all that, right? So there are some procedures and a whole lot of things that are hindrances to doing business with the government. So is there a policy of some kind that will, in the healthcare space, that will enable such innovations that are being built to be adopted by the government far easier than it would be in the traditional methods that one is talking about?
Mohan, you have rightly touched upon a very important aspect on which we are doing something which is a game changer. Hmm? Government was in need of a solution for VC solution, the post COVID, because most of the work was happening virtual rather than physical, and so the initial thrust was using Zooms and the Googles of the world, and we all were unaware of the possibilities of solutions being provided by Indian innovators. At the same time, if we would have gone through a traditional method of procurement, we would have ended up actually adopting one of them. So what we did was we came up with a video conferencing challenge in the month of early April, and we invited applications from all startups and we awarded them rather than paid them, and with a condition that government will use it for the next 4 years. You will be happy to know 1982 applications received to provide a robust video conferencing solution, and it took us the effort required from the top thinkers both in the government and the private sector to come down to one. We never came down to one, actually we came down to four, and now government has adopted those fours, and all the video conferencing meets happens on those four, and the winner has been a small startup from LAP in Kerala. Now, when it comes to COVID, I'll give you an example what we are doing as a game changer in the terms of procurement. Uh, For COVID, the solution seems to be the vaccine. The vaccine needs to be distributed to at least 50% of the Indian population, that comes down to 60 crores or 6 billion. Now, how do you actually address this? The address is, one, you need to have a vaccine. People are doing a lot of efforts on the vaccine. The Serum Institute came up with an open innovation process for developing an Indian vaccine or a Bharat vaccine. But at the same time, once a vaccine is there, the whole supply chain and the logistics have to be handled, and the post vaccine care has to be administered. We are coming up with a challenge in next 4 5 days, where we are looking for startups to provide these solutions to the government, again in lieu of a award, not a procurement cost that we are doing, because the procurement cost, the whole GFR comes into play, and we cannot procure it, but we are giving them award which might be equivalent, or which actually is a substantive reward for providing services to the government. So this is a method by which we will be finding whether, if a vaccine is going through a chain, the temperature efficacy is maintained, the most optimum route is taken, the ASHA worker or the healthcare worker is able to load his data on the day-to-day basis and is being monitored on the central basis. The post-vaccine care for a patient is actually monitored onto a digital platform. So government is coming up with a platform called a CoWIN, which is a digital platform to manage uh, uh, the vaccine distribution. But on top of it, lot of new innovative solutions for vaccine delivery will be actually identified through this challenge and will be part of the government system.
Okay. Now that we spoke about this open data network for health stack and all that, there is also a lot of, any open system has been criticized for not being robust enough, not being secure, and all that, right? India has, as such, does not have very many policies with respect to data security, privacy, especially in the healthcare, like something like HIPAA in the US, for example, which not only gives security but also ensures that data is shared. Today, a hospital patient data is considered to be the asset of the hospital and not the patient himself. He doesn't own his data, the hospital owns his data. So, is there any kind of work that is being done to bring in a regulatory framework that startups have to be aware of and must work towards meeting those regulatory requirements?
The first and the foremost is when you are talking about data, and so the first and foremost is that the healthcare data is one of the most sensitive personal data of a citizen. Hmm? So we need to come up with the data privacy framework as soon as possible. You must be aware that the data privacy law is the property of the parliament at present, and I think if it would not have been COVID, the deliberations would have ended by now and would have been enacted as an act. Uh, but it will be done so soon, what I believe. The second and important is, how do you come up with the standards? You talked about HIPAA, and how do you come up with a access to data policy that once the health, this is an important parameter on which the health stack has been built. Deliberations are going on, and very soon we will be coming up with a comprehensive policy on standards as well as access to data for innovators, in a way that uh, it is actually, you have to handle privacy in that, and you have to handle how the data is actually provided and comes back to the system so that the innovation ecosystem continues.
The other aspect that is peculiar to India is that the urban and the rural contexts are quite different. And a lot of startups today work in the urban environment, not so much the rural environment. What is government's own push to see that it is more equitable spread of healthcare and healthcare solutions between rural and urban, and it's not urban centric?
Mohan, first I'll agree. I'll disagree on this point that our startups are urban centric. I understand that when I talked about frugal low cost solutions by Indian innovators, so startups understand where the market lies for them. They see that the ruler or the large population which is devoid of innovation is the first key market to them. And what I have seen in my little whatever little data I see of the startups, many of those solutions are for the rural masses and outreach of healthcare system to the rural masses. That is one point. The second important point is that a startup is based upon an idea. An idea comes from a problem. So if you are based up from the Silicon Valley, the idea or which is devoid of many problems, so the idea will be the next generation. But for us, we are pushing is that we are pushing the startup ecosystem to the tier 2, tier 3 cities and to the remotest of Indian places where the problem sets of the bottom of the pyramid are captured and converted into solutions for the next phase of innovation to happen. So the next generation incubation scheme, which we have come up with through STPI, aims to establish incubation. 12 have already been established, and more will be established in the tier 2 and the tier 3 cities where STPI has its presence.
Okay, thank you. I'll now move to Ravi. Ravi, as an investor, how have you found startups in this space performing, and an investor's perspective of what you see in this space?
Sure. So I think at a high level, first of all, I have a more consumer centric view, given I have done more consumer centric or maybe service centric, or I will call a SaaS kind of businesses. So high level, the macroeconomic data in this sector is very favorable, because our, like we all know, the GDP spend in healthcare is still low. We know this will expand. While there is more out of pocket expense happening in India, we think the medical insurance will slowly is covering more, is increasing the penetration, so that will help. So high level, and with COVID, there is an accelerated spend happening. So from an investor, the first thing is the market and the size. So that is very much in place. Having said that, like the earlier panel, I think you guys covered on a lot of good points. One of them was also there is this large base of folks which are at the bottom of the pyramid, where there is a huge, I guess maybe portion of that demand, or a large portion that exists. So how can there be innovative solutions that are frugal, yet can reach those large masses? At least especially interest me. One person who comes to my mind in that is Dr. Shetty, who did the innovation in terms of the heart surgery, right, and how he made it low cost. So that's the high level. I feel it's very favorable time to look at it. Again, from my perspective, when I look at it, I am more consumer. So I'm saying, okay, when I walk into the hospital, first of all, how do I decide where to walk in? Is there a place where I can find say a doctor listing, a review, which again I know people are attempting to solve. Let's say I have this problem, who should I go to? Like I'm asking folks, right? And then when I go in there, uh, I know my data is there, like you talked about. EMR system, which is still not kind of fully adopted, so there is not a central place. Now I go to one hospital, two hospital, three hospital. How do I aggregate the data? Can I have like a single view of my record? And if possible, I would want that somebody runs some AI or some analysis and say, you know what, I see this data that you got from hospital. I also know that, let's say I use this fitness band. I know your daily usage, or whatever your key metrics. Can I predict that you are likely for this kind of diseases, or you should go and do this checkup this frequently? So I see from a consumer, there's a ton of stuff that can happen. So there is a lot of opportunity I see. So that's where I'll kind of stop at that question. So
Okay. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of proposals for investment, some healthcare, some
sure,
non-healthcare. So you've seen a whole spectrum.
sure.
Do you see any differences in the challenges that the healthcare startup face as compared to other startups that sort of characterizes them?
Yeah, so I will say, so I do a lot of parallels. I will say the deep tech startups in on the technology side seem like, here you have the large investment, deep science startups. So they are very similar there. Why I draw this parallel is, to me, there is a set of startups which require deep investment and larger cycles to exit, right? So one of the key things in an investment is, how can I get an exit, right? And is the unit economics there? So the first point I kind of hinted at, given that we are targeting a large set of consumers who may not have enough money to spend, you have to have really innovative models for you to make money. And that, while on gross level, like overall level, aggregate is good, but how do you come up with that is one challenge. The second is, you need exits in a venture or angel model within certain time frame, and some of these may not return in that time frames. And third is, some of them are traditionally not fitting to a VC model because they require very large investment. To me, like a drug discovery or some of the other fundamental science work, which is more infra oriented, is probably more owned by a government or government private partnership with a larger horizon versus like a classic VC fund. I mean, so those are some of the things I would say. But having said that, when I look at the services side or the consumer side, the characteristic is similar. Whether I say, oh, I build a CRM for doctors, or I build, so there the characteristics are very similar. And I think there again, I think there is so much of unmet need and unmet demand that we see some good startups there.
Okay, it's nice that you touched upon the time to exit and the returns, and how possibly healthcare doesn't meet the cut that others meet, right? So that's a generic problem in a large part of healthcare, as it were. And I come from the assistive technology space. It cannot be more true than anywhere else than in assistive tech, right? So that is definitely there. But there are other parts of the ecosystem also that play in the investor's mind when you look at all this. So I may have a great innovation, but how do I reach it to the market? So like that, what is it that the ecosystem currently is deficient or low on, which needs to get strengthened for healthcare enterprises to be more successful than what they are today?
Sure. So I think one is this stuff which we were just talking about, which we are hearing from the government, is like this India stack. Again, I've been a big fan and what it enables. So the health stack, that's like a fundamental infrastructure. So think about it. Why is Google Maps so ubiquitous? Because you have the data about what is between point A and point B in terms of traffic, and that data came to us from maybe those telecom providers, right? So that kind of layer of data enables ton of innovation. So that health stack and that public data platform is going to be huge. I think that's something missing. Also, uniform EMR records or EHR, whatever you call it, to me is missing. Because see, when I think from my technology, is this protocol, right? Like we agreed to HTTP or we agreed to TCP IP. That's why we have the internet. Now, the moment we agree to a EMR or HR, and also not the agreement but the adoption part, that is where the next level of big innovation can come in, right? So to me, those are the fundamental underpinning at the bottom. Again, I may be going all over the map given my understanding, but to me that is huge if that can happen.
So as an investor, are the regulations in this particular marketplace daunting for you the way you look at startups, or how do you look at it from the regulatory framework or the burden that it places, or is it easy enough, or the place where a lot of people actually get stuck, in my opinion?
Yeah, no, so I think maybe you have more views because I do more consumer oriented. There, some of this is not a big challenge, but maybe when it comes to, so this is where probably I'm not very to me, it's fine. I mean, I know from the other side, again, I have operated in countries for my SaaS company with the GDPR framework. Like those are separate set of questions which are still getting formulated here. But at least from the space which I look at, the consumer side of it, I don't see any fundamental thing. Maybe in the other spaces that you're talking about, there are fundamental challenges from regulation.
Okay. I have one question for Taslim in this particular space. When you come to drug discovery and the other parts you're talking about, do you see any lacuna in the clinical testing space that will enable these companies to be able to come to market faster?
So I think in terms of the drug discovery space, again, it is actually, I just want to answer your question quickly and then bring out the technology aspect in it. So in terms of clinical testing, when you really want to do test very quickly on phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 aspect, what is very important is a very clear engagement with the regulatory body. Engagement, when I say that our ability to talk to officials, which is getting better and better, and see the regulatory bodies as a professional outfit who can actually engage in a very clear environment and so on, and who are engaging. And I think this is where we have begun to now have even drug discovery companies coming out of India and testing in India rather than going out. So this is actually a good sign that we are seeing. We have slowly we have come out of the the complex dynamics, and we have come out with a much more approachable capabilities in terms of the regulatory bodies. If you see, and I'll be very quick on this, from March to May, we have actually been able to take out many diagnostic companies who have come through to build new diagnostics and got approval from DCGI and ICMR testing together, and that's a very clear sign of how approachable the system has become. And I think this can continually improve further in terms of testing for either for therapeutics or even prophylactic, that is vaccine, in terms of going forward. The only thing which we should strongly and steadily do is that our commitment to keep the quality at the highest level. I think if we slip once, what will happen? We will go 10 years back. One mistake and it can cost us long. So I think the quality lens has to be very sharp without compromising the ease of business in that, if I may use the word. I think that's a very fine balance between the two.
Yeah, I agree with you. I must also say my own experience with the government in the last 5 to 6 years has been very positive. And the turnaround times that I've seen in many of the departments have been extremely heartening. Something
Absolutely.
that I thought would be difficult was not difficult at all. I also think that when I compare years over the last 25 years, in the last 6 to 7 years, or maybe about 8 years, it has become a lot easier to deal with the government, with the bureaucrats also getting vested with a lot of powers within their schedule of authorities, which they can work with. And that has something that has worked very well in the favor of startups and the ecosystem.
Indeed.
Now, let's move to the second part of the discussion, which is on medtech and assistive tech. I'll first go to Dr. Gupta. Dr. Gupta, what is the driving force in terms of building medtech innovations in India? You have hinted at a few of those, saying low cost should reach out to everybody else and all that. But going a little further, since these are hardware products and all that, how does the government want to lay focus on medtech?
So in the medtech zone, yeah, technology is a very important enabler uh, uh, for the healthcare sector. The challenge with the medical is that it's a combination of a software and a hardware. And here the extra challenge comes, that how do we give them access to manufacturing in India? So, whereas people have come up with a lot of innovative solutions, there has been challenges in terms of manufacturing. I came across a startup from ISC Bangalore, which made a wearable to monitor the various important parameters that are related to COVID, but they found a whole lot of challenge to go from a robust product to a end
Manufacturing.
product, uh,
Yeah.
manufactured product. So what you need in a medtech zone is a combination of a startup, a manufacturing facility, and a research facility. All three combined together, and a single window for regulatory clearances, if which are required for this innovation to flow in. The AMTZ is a very clear-cut example where a government has thought about a complete holistic ecosystem for medical equipments to be developed and manufactured in India. And this is one example where we have started. The need for India is threefold: access to components, and a data that can provide you where a particular set of components are available, access to manufacturing PCBs and all others, more and more AMTs and SMTs that are required. So the problem is not about development of medtech equipment. There are a whole lot of companies that are developing very state of the art path breaking equipment. Here, that how do you provide an access to make allowing them to manufacture in India at a lot? The electronic policy 2.0, which the government came up with 2019, has a whole lot of focus that how do we bring medtech manufacturing into India. So the digital part we can solve, but if we are also able to solve the hardware part, then we have actually cracked the problem. In this context, I'll also like to talk about that where do we lack. If we are talking about the healthcare sector or the medtech sector, understand if you are going out of India as a market, then you face a similar set of challenges what you have faced in India. And I think if you are going to the West, you have a greater challenges in terms of the regulatory framework. And I don't think the regulatory frameworks in the West are as honest as many of us perceive. And they have a definite bias towards companies,
Local.
best companies. So what is there is for the medtech or the healthcare sector, the first and the foremost market for them is India. And if they succeed in India and create a name, then they actually are able to go. So what you required is a rupee capital investment that is important for such healthcare or the medtech startup companies to actually succeed. The Electronic Development Fund and the Software Product Development Fund of 25,000 crore that the government is actually proposing to come up soon are a direction in which more and more rupee capital will flow into. So these companies are able to stay in India, develop in India, manufacture in India, and use India as a market. That's my
Okay.
thing.
Yeah. So you touched upon a very important aspect that the government is deeply engaged with. There is a regulatory framework and regulations that one is talking about, right? There is also this view that FDA is stringent, and so if you pass through FDA, it's like the gold standard and all that, right? Now there are two parts. One is we don't seem to have good quality affirmation, like a CE or a TUV is considered, but we don't seem to have something. We still go to that for devices to be sold in India also, right? That is one. Secondly, the CDSU has just come up with the regulatory guidelines for medtech instruments and devices and all that. There's a perception that it is, while it is good in the way it has been specified, it takes way too long to be able to get a device through CDSCO. It's almost about a year and a half, is what I understand. And that sort of a time frame is antithetical to having innovative products coming in, right? So, how do you look at this?
Mohan, that let's understand. You can't take healthcare as a sector which can be loosely regulated as can be possible for many other sectors which are consumer oriented. Hmm? You have to have very stringent regulatory framework because you are dealing with life here. Hmm?
Absolutely.
So one should be concerned if FDA is very stringent. Yes, it needs to be, because it's a healthcare sector. Hmm? Uh, Maybe you can have little reform, but I think that there has to be a stringent regulation. But the traditional method by which medtech sector was handled was through ethical committees of various hospitals and medical systems, through which a health device used to enter the new market hospital wise. The CDS is one attempt where we are coming up with a comprehensive single spot regulatory clearance so that they do not have to deal with every hospital and every individual on individual basis. That was not a very efficient way and not a very foolproof way. So yes, there are initial challenges. The first attempt has been made. Reforms will come in, and I assure you that the government is all for support for Indian innovation to flow into healthcare. What all needs to be done will be done.
Okay. So that's very heartening and very supportive. Of course, I was anyway coming to talk about the AMTZ in Vizag and what kind of investments were is the government trying to make, and you already touched upon that. Is there any other significant initiatives that you think the government is due to take for the medtech stroke assistive tech sector? So one space, I come from the assistive tech space, and there we definitely have a challenge is that there are very few protocols for testing, and there are no standards for testing quality. There are ISO standards for a wheelchair, which is only for about fatigue testing and maybe crutches, but but the whole assistive tech space is so huge, but there's hardly any regulation or any way by which one can ensure that a product supports a certain context or environment.
But Mohan, yeah, there needs to be a more stringent regulatory framework and more formalized, both for the assistive and the medtech systems. I agree with you. But at the same time, I like to tell you, both in the assistive space and in the also in the medtech space, there are a lot of repetitive solutions that come. So there is a lack of support in terms of a mentorship and an acceleration ecosystem that these innovative companies. If there was COVID in the initial days, every startup was making an attempt to make a ventilator, and 3 months down the line, you found ventilator to be useless to deal with COVID. Hmm? And there's no market for them. And if you bring out those, you won't be able to bring them to the market within 6 months, which was the need at that time if you have to enter the market, which was perceived. So someone has to tell them that, and I find around 40 to 50 hearing aid devices from India, lot of other solutions. The problem in India is that no one is actually supporting them on the call that where the market lies for such technology. You might be doing a lot of social transformation in this process. You might be looking very impressive as a solution creator, but necessarily that might not be a market, because anyway you have a limited market, because a very limited number of people will be needing assisted devices. And if you actually start from the day one creating a replica of a which is from GE Healthcare or some others, you are actually challenging yourself initially.
Okay, thank you. That's a nice perspective that we've got from the government side. I'll move on to Tasleem. Uh, Tasleem, this is your home ground in terms of work that is being done. And can you touch upon how incubation for medtech is different from incubation for other businesses that one has seen? And what are the special characteristics that one has to specifically address that require special attention?
Indeed. Thanks, Mohan. I think before I say, as Dr. Gard mentioned, CCAMP is also a partner and a beneficiary of the scheme that I also thank you for that support from MIT. I think while we have been building innovations and supporting innovation for 8, 9 years, our engagement with MIT started only last year, and we hope that we can take it forward. But just connecting that thought, I think 2 years back we realized that the engagement with digital health per se was a very important thing, as I mentioned in my introductory remark. I think India as a healthcare setup would require digital health to come in and build that important pillar to serve the currently unserved population. And I think that's very, very important. I'm connecting that right now with your question that when one talks about medtech, as you rightly heard, and I think Dr. Garg mentioned about the ventilator system, and we are very, very delighted that one of our own work from Koyo Labs is a US FDA approved product right now, serving people of within many states to provide ventilator associated product that actually prevents one of the most fatal condition associated with ventilator called ventilator associated pneumonia. What happens is that patients who are on ventilator develop pneumonia as a side infection, as a side thing, and actually we lose them because of that rather than anything else. So, and the COVID numbers of people that we are losing once they go on ventilator is 80 to 9% right now in India. And I think this product, which is a US FDA approved product, is actually saving lives as we speak. So investment in medtech from long haul is very important, and at the same time, as one would say, patience. It is very different from other places. It is not providing either space or infrastructure or a machine or something else. It's about the journey. It's about engagement, and I think this is a philosophy that CCAM possibly rely heavily on. Into say every innovation is crucial, and because of its impact that it has, and it's hand holding, and actually it's driving home. So if I may just take this example of Koyo Labs, If you allow me, I'll be very quick on this. These are two very smart, if I may use the word, non-biologists. One was a product of NID Ahmedabad, so design engineer, if I may say so, and one is a mechanical engineer, are late 20s at max. They 4 years back, they actually spent time in ICUs and found that there is something that actually is causing side effects and losing lives up to 50% in elderly once they acquire pneumonia on ventilator. 50, every other person globally, we lose them. And at that time, first of all, and this is where I'm coming from, we supported them at the idea level to build a sensor which goes on to another with a ventilator towards your trachea and prevent trickling of your saliva to your lungs, which causes pneumonia. It's a very, very starting thing. But the idea was to handhold them, support them, and think of it. The clinical testing you mentioned in your previous question, Mohan. Now, how do you do clinical testing for patients who are on ventilator? How difficult that is, right? So they did a clinical study for 30 people in one of the biggest, hospital in India. Usual numbers suggest that 10 out of 30 people acquire pneumonia on it, and every other elderly person will lose. None of 30 got the pneumonia on it. What actually it meant, if I may just summarize to your question again, is belief in early idea, how crazy it may sound, having the journey towards proof of concept, scale up again, which is difficult, and most important is the clinical testing, as you rightly said. But we have been through them for a journey for last 4 to 5 years completely, not necessarily having them at CCAMP and say that this is your 100 square feet or something, but rather holding them, hand holding them almost on a weekly basis and engaging with them and providing them all the support. So this is the difference between a healthcare, which is a very crucial, as Dr. Garg said, it's a different ball game than many other. It impacts your health, and anything goes wrong, you have the issue. But handholding and nurturing with innovators is a key here, and doing whatever it takes is very, very important. I'm sorry about the long answer, but I think I just wanted to
Oh,
share.
the long answer is merited for this. So, coming from the assist space, also I can tell you the same thing. So we cover assist tech, we cover rehabilitation tech, and we're also looking at technologies to prevent disabilities. Okay, that is something a lot of people have not looked at. Typically in areas like diabetes, for example, where you have downstream infections and conditions, how do you prevent those downstream infections and conditions is a very important aspect. It ultimately leads to disability.
Absolutely.
There are multiple areas like that where we can prevent disabilities. The biggest challenge that I have seen in this space in that front is that, well, others talk about saying in about 12 months' time you launch a product, you will find traction in 18 months' time, you will scale in 24, 26 months' time, you will get Series A in under 3 years' time. Right? That 3 years here stretches to 12 years. Okay? Guy, even after 8 to 9 years, is still not sure whether it will scale or it will not scale.
Indeed.
The risk factors are fairly high. You need to be associated with them for a longer period of time, and at the same time, get them to achieve something substantial in the first 3 years. Otherwise, anyway, they're dead.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
Absolutely.
definitely, this in the incubation space itself, this is one of the most tricky areas, I think, and I must say that anybody working in this space should be commended for that. I also think the government has gone on a limb to support such special incubators very well. And I will speak for RD Lab as the one that I lead as an example, where they have been very forthcoming in supporting us to say we want some work to be done in this area. There's nobody else doing anything in this area. So there is this sense of adventure in the government also to explore new areas that have not been explored, which enables us actually support this ecosystem. If the government was not there to support us, I don't think we could have set up incubators in this space and hope to see enterprises coming out of this space. Right? So that is, I think, is definitely very important. Now, in the companies that you have looked at, typically, what is the maturity cycle that you've seen across the spectrum?
So, in med, I'll stay with medtech space, as you have said, not possibly going towards drug discoveries and other work that we're doing. But in medtech space, easily you build something. If you are going after that, we are attempting is to new technologies. We are going after technology that challenges global, I think, traditions in terms of serving people and change the behavior patterns in the practice per se. I think easily, I think your maturity would be more than 5 years. You have to have greater than 5 years as the early stage. I think nothing smaller than that. I'll tell you a very quick example. Another very exciting work, which four young girls, one of them from Jharkhand, phenomenal engineers. Total founders age of four girls is less than 100 years, and they are building something for as neonatal inflammation monitoring. That is nothing but when a young baby of few days they get infection, we can't get as much blood out to understand what infection it is or whether the inflammation, the response to infection is going so high. So usually for taking blood, we prick the hill for these young neonates, and you can't do it much because they are so young. You can't risk their lives by that. They have built a small stick device which actually goes to saliva as a sample and tries to see whether from saliva we can get the same understanding that a blood can give. This is path breaking per se. This is path breaking. They are in the play for last 3 to 4 years. They're getting some work done at Safdarjung Hospital now. If their testing goes well, this is clinical testing, this will be another thing. But think of it, this is going to take 4 to 5 years. And to expect that while as much as great idea it sounds, to be able to prove and change the manner clinical work has been done in this, that is usually blood, it is greater than 5 years. Are they struggling in terms of Series A? Of course, yes, they are struggling, right? And I think they're struggling badly. And if I may use, I'm sorry, I'm going to say that, but something simpler gets much better funding than a path breaking, right? And that is something biggest challenge that we have. But not that we are going to stay back on that. We are going to build innovations using that. But I think that if these girls actually get the clinical testing, we will change the way the world will do neonates inflammation testing, and that's where the fun is. That's where the fun is in terms of how we can save more neonates' life using that. So this is the larger difference in terms of the medtech. We have the challenges are everyday challenges, but the fun is that finally, if we serve the society, I think there's nothing better gratification than that.
Thank you, Taslim, for your detailed answer. I'll move on now to Ravi. Ravi, you have heard all of us talk about the issue of funding, right? I call it a value of death, and which is well known in the venture capital space. And most of the companies in the medtech space and in the assistive tech space, 90% of them invariably reach the value of death, right? So, as an investor, what would you say would be likely methods by which we can try and mitigate that, either as an ecosystem, or what's it that you think the government can do to mitigate that part so that there is there is greater survival rates in startups that deal with this? It is very difficult to find people wanting to work in this space because it's long drawn. There is motivation, but that does not replace funds. That's another important pillar on which enterprises run. So, how does one address that particular challenge in this ecosystem?
Sure. So I think there are two parts. First, I will cover what are some of the challenges, then get into the type of funding. So
Yeah.
some of the challenges you guys have already shared. One is around the market size. The market size may not be huge for some cases, and that is the reason why some of these are still, I think, we are lagging, or meaning overall in the world, assistive technologies are lagging in some sense in terms of what is being available to somebody, say, with autism or something else, right? And so that's huge. That's because the size is not there. Second is the demand is fragmented. And it's still a challenge, like we answered in the first part, to reach these people, right? And finally, how do you build a product? How do you prove the efficacy? It's much harder, so those are the challenges from the pure, building, and that's why the long gestation. I think the answer to the second part, what can an entrepreneur do, and what, like, from an investor. So to my view is investors are of different types. That is what one should understand. And venture capital or a classic angel is only a slice of a type of investor available there. That is what we need to understand. And not all solutions will match the business model of a classic angel or a classic VC. So having said that, then what are the alternatives out there, right? Can there be an alternative where somebody is giving a debt, right? Again, I don't know a lot of the answers. I do know there are alternative types of investors. Maybe somebody who's looking at it from impact investing, right? I don't know, it doesn't fit directly to impact though, but there could be some who are looking from an impact perspective, or some who are corporate venture arms who are looking at a longer gestation. They don't care about, and they understand the cycles in this space, and it is adjacent. So those alternate, and then of course the government, because it's for a public good, right? Those are the forms, or there are maybe non-profits who are putting in capital. So I think those are the forms of investment somebody has to look at. But having said that, again, it's commendable with some of the work that goes on, and I think one does want to support those entrepreneurs. But like I said, it's also a function of right now I'm speaking as an angel, but let's say if I am a classic venture capitalist, which for example I also have raised money from somebody with certain metrics or certain characteristics, right? So I may not be able to, or like some of them may not meet those criteria, is what I'm trying to say. So you got to look outside. Yeah.
So one of the aspects that you mentioned is you raise money for some metrics. So you have LPs who will want certain ROI to be met, some thresholds to be met. So one of the solutions is to try and build different characteristics, and this is where I think the government actually comes in a sense that this is the proposition that I've been trying to talk to the government also, is that you should have a grant-based investment fund that is given to special incubators, special sector incubators, who can then invest to act as a bridge between the initial product development and at least maturity to be able to garner angel funds, right? So that we don't have such funds in India, but I'm hoping that we can. So there is no restriction of having to return something to an LP, and you're not driven by what the LP demands out of your fund.
Yeah, I'll also add, there is this other notion of called the evergreen funds, who are rolling funds. They don't have a lifetime. So those funds are still fewer in number, but as those come along, they may have a little more flexibility in terms of the lifeline. But you're right. I think these are the alternatives that we need to explore.
The other thing that I have found is impact funds are called impact funds, but the ROI requirements are more or less the same as the regular VCs.
That's correct.
It is like a charter that is different, but the metrics are no different.
Sure.
So in that sense, they don't even fulfill that gap that one is talking about.
Okay.
Yeah? And neither do we have an evolved system of family foundations like you have in Europe and the US, which look at non-return based investments. So you can take 20 years and return this money to me without any interest, but return the money to me. So there is some commitment, but there is no cost of money, so to say. Right? These have not really evolved in India. But I think the government is eminently placed to play that role in some sense. And it will do good to have the government invest in some part of this. Today it's all given as grants, but the grant amounts are small. They come to a maximum of 50 lakhs, right? That does not in any form replace the equity infusion required by all these companies, as one were to look at it. Taslim, any views on this?
No, absolutely. I think this is where I think it's very, very important that, and I think Dr. Garg actually mentioned it very briefly about supporting innovations that can be built in India, scaled up in India, manufactured in India, and use India as a market. I think it's a very important view, and I think this is something that I think Mohan, you made a case for, and I think it continues to be a case, because I think this has to be a very important thing, because as I rightly said, we have built a very good system now for early stage innovations in a way through a primary school analogy that I gave. Now, if those primary school graduates go out because they didn't find good schools in India and good funding in India, they go out and flip the companies. What we are actually facing is, I call it, is a innovation drain. We had a brain drain. We are actually now innovation drain. We did a very good studies programs in India, and then brain drain happened, and myself, I was out and so on. So nonetheless, so that was the brain drain. Now what we are facing is that in lookout for a better environment and funding environment largely as a top thing, there are companies which are flipping where they are making a US or a Europe centric headquarters and then having India as a subsidy, if it may be. And I think this is where a risk funding approach with intervention for a kind of a tax holiday for investment or something of that sort, whichever model it would be. I may not have the final model in mind. You suggested a model already that you can have the higher funding requirement. For the next 3 to 5 years, it is a requirement until the VCs actually gets more confidence in the system and their charter, as I think Ravi mentioned, changes. When they go to their LPs, they can say, I want to do more risk funding because my return on next 8 to 10 years will be much higher, so that I can cover it. I think that confidence that many of the ecosystems, be it in Bay Area, be it in San Diego, be it in Boston area, or possibly others, the confidence in the investment funding, it has come over years, not overnight. Israel has done it as well, very well, where the government has come in. So I'm with you on that suggestion and I think very delighted to hear Dr. Garg's comment. The government is committed to do that, and I think we should continue, working on that together to have risk funding being actually more available for innovative startups, because high risk requires higher funding, and that is something as a collectively we should do.
Good, thank you. Dr. Garg, any
So,
in your side?
let me touch on 3 points. First and foremost is that many of the assisted technologies that you are talking about, I believe that to be more of a social entrepreneurship rather than a market assisted entrepreneurship. So there needs to be a framework in which there needs to be supported to a social entrepreneurship. So if we came up enabling the CSR fund to be flowed into the startups, the primary reason behind those deliberations in which I happened to was how do we support us? Many of the medtech companies which are actually into social entrepreneurship doing a paramount of efforts to actually help the most needy. So that was the CSR fund has been enabled to flow into the startup. And what we are now trying to do through the Mighty Startup Hub and many other attempts is that how more and more CSR funds actually come into the system to help such entrepreneurs. That is one. The second is, and the foremost is, understand if Tasleen talked about the Silicon Valley and other places, the crowdfunding has been the most critical route through which investments have come into such systems. Unfortunately, because of a lack of transparency in our financial institutions and the financial systems, and with many of the challenges which we faced in the first from 2010 to 2016-17, the crowdfunding mechanism could not be activated at that uh, minutest level which is actually in place in US. We are looking at that how do we actually have a strong regulatory framework around crowdfunding, but at the same time allow people to invest in startups through crowdfunding, and that will be an important route of investment in such system, because as Ravi rightly said that the return of investment for private investor is the key parameter on which he will invest, and many of these solutions might not be the best places to actually uh, have the best matrix around the return of investment. The third and the important point is that many of these technologies have a long gestation period, as Tasleen also said, and you should have a fund. And if the typical venture or an angel have an exit of 3 to 5 years, you need to actually extend it to 7 to 10 years. The software product development fund and the electronic development fund is an attempt where we are looking at long-term gestation periods to assist such companies which will take longer to return the money back into the system. So what I feel is that you need to be far more innovative. If the user himself is able to pay and take a risk of a solution which he foresees to solve his problem for 2 years down the line, yeah, that is the best way by which investments can come into such systems. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it sort of dealt with whole range of questions that we have. A brief 10-second last thoughts from each of the panelists.
I think let me say that we have been in this for last 10 years at CCAMP, and having been involved with innovators all across India, I think we are very excited. I think India is going through a phenomenal churn. I myself is every day excited about what I'm seeing around me. We have done phenomenal work at the early stage. Now we have to understand that we have to, scale our own support system to support the churn that we are seeing, and I think that's where we have to work together. But uh, many positives. We have a possibility of really challenging the world in terms of healthcare, what we are going through, and I think it will require a lot of work for us to work together to make reality of that potential. So very positive, excited to work in this field, and thanks all for support from every quarter. Thank you.
Thank you. Ravi?
I was going to say some amazing points with Dr. Garg. I was going to maybe add more on that. Like the CSR fund, that's a huge initiative, and if it can flow to the assistive tech, that's huge. Crowdfunding, again, another big area. If we can have a framework, that's huge. Again, the best funding comes from actually the end user, which is a point I want to make, and I think that's a key point which was made by Dr. Garg. So again, summary. I think it's an amazing time to be in this space as an investor, given the macroeconomic trends. Amount of innovation is huge, and I think there is a lot of opportunity where investors like me could participate, and also even in other aspects as well. So, great time to be in this space.
So Mohan, I think that this has been a great learning movement. I'm not a healthcare expert, and neither I'm a investment expert. I learned a lot from Ravi, you, and Ashleen, and this has been a great session. The only point I would like to make in the last is that more than a entrepreneurship ecosystem which the healthcare system or the assisted tech is making, it's more of a social impact that it will cause and will affect as a system, as a government, as both federal and central, as investors, as industry, as academia, and as medical experts or digital experts. We all need to come together, think of solutions, that how can more and more such solutions can flow into the system and help the mankind with a more better quality of life that we all deserve. This is what. So the last point I want to make, Mohan, before is that what in my own personal belief is that we have a very strong incubation ecosystem for all this. We have come up with many facilities that can be provided. The investment community has started looking at them more seriously post COVID. What we lack is a connect between a startup coming out of an incubator and an investor. The US, through all these Y combinators and all this, have a strong accelerator ecosystem which we are lacking. And because many of these technologies might have multiple applications, and uh, the developer might be actually concentrating on one application. If he actually broadens his aspect on multiple applications for his technology, it broadens his market. So we need an accelerator ecosystem which is important to bring to scale up all these solutions, and that we have made an attempt through three first accelerators that we have supported and mighty, and many more are required in this place. We need a Y Combinator for sure.
Thank you, Dr. Garg. And you rightly said that you need. So, amongst the requirements of startups to do well, the biggest challenge in this case happens to be funding, because it doesn't fit the regular models of funding and sources are not available. Sources of sourcing innovations and supporting them have been reasonably well established. Like you said, accelerators have to be there to bring these products to market better. There are a few accelerators, and we've worked with a few accelerators also, and some of them are supported by both Startup India and Making, right? The only aspect that one would like to draw attention to is while CSR was intended to be a source of fund, it has not acted so. The last known report shows 54 crores as the amount of money of CSR that has flown into incubators, not necessarily assistive tech or med tech. All incubators in the country put together 54 crores, right? Which is a drop in the ocean as compared to the total CSR that is available. If MeitY and the government is able to find some way of being able to channelize or funnel funds better into the innovation ecosystem through CSR, I think it'll go a long way in trying to mitigate one of the largest problems that one has in this space. And I would leave Dr. Garg with that thought and the others. And thank you for the wonderful panel that we have had. And we have had an exciting time, and I hope the audience also enjoys this particular session. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. On behalf of Tech Bharat, a wholehearted thanks for taking time out and being part of this session. Thank you very much. We wish you the very best and a good day. Namaste.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Dr. Garg.
Thank you.